I think Elon Musk is just fascinating. But would you like to talk a little bit about the spreadsheet that launched 100 rockets?
Yeah. So when you take a look at SpaceX, the core insight was that there was something goofy happening in the market. The cost of uh, rocketry, the cost of putting things in space was going up, and yet uh, the cost of the actual rocket was about 2% of the cost of the flight. If they could look at the materials cost, right, the metal, the copper, the whatever. So they figured out that if they could look at the different components of the rocket and cost reduce them, change the processes by which they were made, they would have a significant cost advantage and it would be difficult to overcome. And this is exactly what we're seeing. You know, the fascinating thing about what Musk did was a lot of the processes were similar to what the Russians did to catch up with the United States. Like he didn't have to invent. He's an incredibly inventive guy, but he didn't have to invent a new way of doing business. He just had to invent a way of doing business that the Boeings and the Lockheeds of the world weren't able to do because of how they were locked into the industrial structure. And so he gave himself a huge boost. He gave himself, 8 or 9 years of runway, to the point where in 2008, when SpaceX had some real financial troubles, NASA bailed him out because they were forcing the price of space down. Not necessarily because at that point they thought they were going to be the winner, but mainly because they were just forcing the price of space down. And so the question is, how do you look at those first principles, right? What's actually going on here? And sometimes it's the answers to come up with an entirely new way of doing things. But a lot of times it's really just looking at the system and saying, okay, well, where can I do things that others can't? How can I nudge the system to my strategic advantage, as opposed to playing by other people's rules?
And I think the interesting thing about the Elon Musk story is that, he almost comes at it with a fresh pair of eyes. Because I think, not that I'm a rocket expert, but I think a lot of the cost is you can't reuse the rocket. You send people up, you don't reuse the rocket. But I think he's actually reusing the rocket, which I think drives down the costs. And then he's changing the way, I think with one of his new launch vehicles, the way it separates from the rocket from the vehicle. And that saves costs because you don't have to come up with these complicated processes. Therefore, the things that can go wrong are reduced. And I think a lot of times, if you can make it as simple as possible, and even with your career, just make things simple. Don't try and come up with these elaborate ideas which aren't necessary. Look at the reality of the situation. Try and look at the future and come up with a plan and a strategy. What do you think, Jonathan?
I absolutely agree. I'm the ultimate example of someone who writes and talks about complexity. But at the end of the day, it's the simple decisions that are typically the most reliable.